Hello, folks. My name is Mark Moyer, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar, How to Leverage Your Connections into Interviews. And I'm going to be showing you a whole bunch of things today. But the bottom line is that people spend so much time looking at LinkedIn, but not really using it to its fullest potential. And my opinion is you can actually use it in a variety of ways that can allow you to turn those connections into informal meetings and then interviews, and naturally leading to offers. So first things first, I'd like to tell you a brief bit about myself. As you can see, I'm a career strategist. It's a name I thought of, but then I realized that 11,000 other people on LinkedIn and otherwise tend to call themselves that. It's a great way of using a different term as career coach and so forth. But I've also been an executive recruiter for a long time. And my perspective has always been to really push hard for people to get into the jobs that they love doing. And I'd like to talk to you right now about the upcoming webinar I've got in 2 weeks from today. And I have to limit it to only 50 participants. I'm going to really market it quite a bit. It's going to be sent out to a wide array of professionals that can benefit from this. And it's a pretty critical one because it's really discussing the 3 simple steps to ace your next interview. And it's something that I have been preparing my candidates, the ones that I've represented in executive search, for a long, long time. In fact, for the last 25 years. And there are a variety of things you can do to really prepare yourself. But what I'll be showing you in this webinar is how to answer the basic and the complex interview questions. You know, you get the questions like, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Boy, is that a horrible one. Or what are your strengths and weaknesses? But these are often asked by people that are really crappy interviewers. They just don't know what to ask you. So they resort to these inane and ridiculous questions, right? So we're going to try to get past those people and past those questions. I'm also going to show you some tips and tricks that will really make you be the person that they choose to make an offer to. It'll make you stand out. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is make it so that if you are truly a viable candidate for the position, if you are truly, in your mind, someone who can do the job and really excel at it, and you want to make sure that because of that, you're the one that gets the offer. I'm certain that all of you know people in your life that you're connected to and so forth that have received offers in jobs that you are completely shocked that they actually got those offers, right? These are people that you said to yourself, oh my God, there's no way that this guy has enough experience for that job. But they happen to be amazing interviewers. And on the flip side, you've probably seen people that you thought were perfectly suited for a position, but they just had a lousy interview. So the upcoming webinar, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, is all about how you can really ace your next interview. So who am I? Why am I doing this? Well, I said for the past 20 years, but it's really been closer to 25 years that I've been advising people how to get jobs and how to get hired. I've been an executive recruiter throughout that time, but I've also found that I like to inject a little bit of the career coaching into everybody that I represent, because quite frankly, if as a recruiter, if I'm representing you into a company, I want to make sure that you're the one that gets the offer. So it makes perfect sense for me to provide you as much advice, as much ammunition, as much of a head start as possible so that you're the one that gets that offer, right? And unfortunately, I've noticed that the vast majority of recruiters don't prepare their candidates at all. What they tend to do is they'll meet you, they'll walk through your resume, they'll get a better feel for what you do, but that's it. And then they maybe send your resume, they maybe don't, right? So my perspective has always been to really show people how to ace the interview, to show people how to get in front of the right people, to show people how to network. and to show people afterwards how to negotiate an offer they get. So I think I'm going to jump into, I'm going to show you how I look live here real quick, so you know I'm not some mystery robot. But just a real quick history of my background. After I graduated college back quite a long time ago, almost 30 years ago, I graduated from Colgate University. I spent a year out on the West Coast, and when I came back, I decided that I really wanted to be in investment banking. But to skip a whole bunch of steps, I ended up in sales, and then I ended up as a recruiter. And at the time that I ended up as a recruiter, I was thinking, well, gee, what better way to find a really great job than to be at a search firm? And I just go on myself on the interview. But as I spent more time as a recruiter, I realized I really had a passion for it, and I happened to be pretty good at it. So throughout the time that I was a recruiter, I had a tendency to spend a lot of time coaching the individuals that I was representing. And it turns out that the owner of my search firm at the time really didn't appreciate that. His position was, look, Mark, don't waste all your time preparing these people, because all they're going to do is take your advice and then go to another search firm and get their job through them. And those people will get the fee. Well, as it turns out, people were taking my advice and they were getting jobs. But what ended up happening was they'd come back to me anyway, because they really appreciated the fact that I ended up giving them the advice that ended up getting those jobs. So I've always been a recruiter from that perspective, but I've always wanted to help. So several years ago, I ended up becoming a career coach. Basically, that happened when the market turned south and there wasn't a lot of hiring going on. But I realized I was giving a lot of advice to people that I'd known for a long time. And obviously, I wasn't being paid for that. So at one point, I decided, well, I'd like to become a paid career coach. And since that time, I've been doing both. I've been placing people into the banking industry, but I've also been really helping people in every type of industry figure out not only what it is they love doing, but where they'd like to be, and then how to develop a sales pitch, basically, or really a marketing pitch about themselves, how to answer the question, what do you do? How to basically end up getting meetings that turn into interviews and eventually offers, showing people how to interview. And then once they've settled into a position, really showing them how to basically assimilate themselves into their new company. And that's become my true passion. So that's my background. I love doing these webinars. I love showing people a whole ton of information, a whole ton of advice, and I jam as much as I can into the time that we've got here. So with that said, I'm going to close out my part of it and go back to the screen share and start showing you, get going on the slides and whatnot again. All right, here we go. So, which of these following applies to you? Are you unsure about how to convert your LinkedIn connections into immediate interview opportunities? Now, what I mean by that is that you may have 100, 500, 1,000, 2,000 LinkedIn connections, but what do you do with them, right? Now, before I go much further, I'd love it if you could put in the chat box real quickly an approximate amount of how many LinkedIn connections you've got. If you could put that in there, that'd be great. I'd love to see how many you have, whether it's 100, 200, 500, 1,000, 5,000, whatever it might be. Please put in the chat box how many of those you have. Now, as you put those in, I'm going to show you some ways shortly that will really show you how to convert those into interview opportunities. Now, I'm not sure if this applies to you or not, but if you've been unable to answer the question, what do you do when you meet someone for the first time? I'm going to show you a few ways how to answer that. And look, do you wish you were the one that was able to follow up with people without sounding too pushy, without seeming like you're getting in their way? We're going to talk about that. Now, this is what you're going to learn today. I will absolutely show you how to answer the first question that people ask when they say, well, what do you do? And we're going to talk about how to turn it into an effective personal marketing opportunity. We're also going to show you, I'm going to show you how to connect directly with them and how to set up the calls that will lead to those meetings and interviews and offers. I'm also going to show you how you can follow up with them and how you should follow up with them without being too pushy, aggressive, and so on. And look, at the end of the day, I want you to be seen in their eyes, and hopefully we'll have met them before they even think about looking at your resume. Now, just a couple of ground rules and so forth. I know a couple people are asking me if this is being recorded. It absolutely is, and yes, it will be available later. Also, I will be stopping a few times here and there, as I've done already, and asking you a few questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please enter it in the chat box below or on the right there. But do me a favor and please keep it relevant to the topic. Once in a while, one or more of you may experience the occasional sound or a visual issue. That's often related to your bandwidth and not necessarily the production or the broadcast of this event. So I won't be able to necessarily address those specifically with you during the presentation, but if needed, I'll have someone else take a look. And at the end of the webinar, I'm going to post a link to the upcoming webinar, along with a couple of surprises that we're going to talk about, including some bonus materials. Now, one thing I did not really talk about yet, but I'm going to now, is if you stick to the very end, I will be giving one of the attendees a free hour of coaching, which for someone like myself, a free session is usually $400 and higher. So we will be giving that away at the very end. So good luck to all of you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a quiz question that will be from some of the stuff that we've spoken about already. So that way you all have a chance to win. All right. So how should I use my LinkedIn network? Look at this guy. He's got lots of question marks around him, but it's true. It's people that are really unsure about how to go about doing this. LinkedIn is right now used by over 400 million professionals. But it still amazes me that such a low percentage, maybe just 2% really use it to its fullest potential. Maybe not even that many. And in my opinion, LinkedIn remains the best low-hanging fruit to find a job in this market. It is a great way to do research, and it's the best way to be seen and to be heard. There are a ton of ways that you can be seen by hiring managers, key influencers, executive recruiters, other hiring managers that will make you stand out and be the ones that are chosen. Now, what do you do first, though? We've talked about this in previous webinars, but it's really something that I feel is important to really go over once again briefly. So how do you find the right people to network with? How do you find the right people to connect with? It's not a question of just randomly picking people that you think, well, gee, it'd be kind of neat to know Bob Smith. It's really essential that you develop a target list. And what I'm referencing with a target list is thinking first about, well, what are the 4 or 5 positions that you would love to have right now? The ones that you would love to be in, the ones that you would really excel in, that you would wake up Monday morning and be excited going to. And assuming there's 4 or 5 positions within a company, well, then I want you to make a list of 40 or 50 companies that you would love to work at. And if you've got a list of 50 companies and 4 or 5 positions, well, then suddenly you have a list of 200 or more positions that you would love to be in. And my opinion is it's always critical to be proactive with a list and be proactive with your job search, to go after the positions that you want to be in. Why should you settle for a crappy job when you could be going after the jobs that you really want to be in? And that's my big push, is as I coach people, whether on a one-to-one basis or in a group setting or on these webinars, it's really important for you to keep going after the job you want to do. People are getting hired every day in their dream jobs. But you may have only heard about the people that are getting hired into the crappy jobs, or the ones that they're just doing to get by, or the jobs that they're just settling for. You don't need to do that. And once you've developed that target list of 200 jobs you'd love to be in, well, then you start running advanced searches on LinkedIn. There's an advanced search button in the upper right next to the regular search bar. And you might be using topics like, within that advanced search, you may have something where you include the school you went to, or something you have an interest in, or a sport, or a hobby, or an association. And then you put the company next to it. So for example, I went to Colgate University. I might put in Colgate University, and then I might have Morgan Stanley. And this will show me all the Colgate grads that either are working now or used to work at Morgan Stanley. And then you're off and running, because then you can send them personalized invitations, which I'll talk about shortly. But it's also essential that you join a bunch of groups, because when you join groups, you can see what the activities are within those groups, the discussions, and most importantly, you can see who the members are. And when you see who the members are, you can reach out to them directly and say, hey, Jim, I see you're a fellow hockey player. Would love to connect with you here on LinkedIn and ask your advice as I'm considering a transition. Look forward to hearing from you and setting up a call. Regards, Mark. And these are the invitations you can send out all day when you've developed a target list, you've run some advanced searches, and you've joined a bunch of groups. From there, when you connect on LinkedIn and you've run this search and you click on the connect button for a specific person, well, as you may know, it opens up a box that says, well, how do you know this person? Well, don't worry so much about that, because when someone receives that invitation now on LinkedIn, it doesn't say, this is how you know Bob or Sam or Nancy and so on. So what you can do is either pick classmate, or I used to work with this person, or I do business with this person, but don't pick I don't know, and don't pick friend. Just pick the top 2 or 3. Pick any of those. And it is essential that you personalize the invitation. Anybody that's heard me speak in the past knows this. If I receive an invitation from you that says just a generic, Mark, I'd like to connect with you professionally here on LinkedIn, I almost always delete it, because I look at it as this person didn't have the time to actually give me a reason why they want to connect with me. And when you personalize it, the person receiving it always appreciates it, especially if they can identify with you. And the way we do these invitations is in a way that we make sure that they see how we are connected, how we share a common bond. Now, in those invitations, you're only limited to 300 characters, so you have to use them wisely. So I've included here just one of many examples that I use to connect with people. So what do you say once you've connected? Well, in this case here, I've written, hello, Bob. As a fellow Colgate graduate, I thought you would be a great person to connect with here on LinkedIn and ask for your advice and insight. Let's set up a call to introduce ourselves at your convenience. Hope all is great at Company ABC. Regards, Mark. Now that right there is probably just about 300 characters, so it just perfectly fits in there. It may be a couple under, which allows you to have hello, Ronald or Ezekiel or whatever the person's name is. But I always tell people, you take an invitation like this, you copy and paste it into a Word document, which you save on your desktop. The Word document, you call it LinkedIn templates. And then what you do is, this way, every time you connect with somebody that happens to also be a Colgate graduate, all you need to do is copy and paste that in. All you do is just switch it from hello Bob to hello Nancy to hello Sue to whatever. And then you switch, make sure you switch hope all is great at Company ABC, hope all is great at Deutsche Bank, Colgate-Palmolive, Coca-Cola, whatever it might be. Or you can just simply say hope all is great, so that way you don't have to worry about changing it every time with Company ABC. But this is just one of a few different template type of connection invitations that I like to send out. They're extremely compelling because when someone receives that, obviously it looks very much like it's been written just for them. And imagine if you were Bob receiving this. and you're thinking, oh, wow, a fellow Colgate graduate reached out to me. That's cool. I appreciate that. Oh, and they want my advice and they want my insight. Cool. Let's set up a call. You know what? I'd talk to this guy. Why not? Hope all is great. Well, this is a really nice message. I'll definitely accept this person's invitation to connect, and we'll see about setting up a phone call. Now you can see how this is way more effective than that generic one. And the acceptance rate on these is probably 50 to 60% higher than it would be on the generic one. And when you send out 50 or 100 of these invitations, getting all those acceptances from people that'll be directly impacting your next position is really, it's probably going to be what lands you that great job. I hope this is all making sense so far, but please feel free to jump in the chat room if you have any questions at all with the process, and I'll do my best to answer them as we go along. Now look, as you're talking to these connections, or I'm sorry, as you're connecting with these people, please make sure to look at their backgrounds, look at their experience, where they went to school, what their interests are, what groups they're members of. Find common bonds with them. Also, if they've published anything on LinkedIn or recorded any videos that maybe they've got links to YouTube, make sure you check those out. When you reach out to them, when you interact with them, demonstrate your interest in them. Show them that you actually care about them and what they do. This will obviously compel them to be much more interested in you. Okay? Now I'm going to stop this for 1 sec, and I'm going to throw out another poll at you real quick. It's going to be, I'm just going to let you see it, and I'm going to talk to you about this. Now, the most important thing I think is to really develop a very strong marketing message about your background. So I've put in this poll here, well, how do you answer generally? What do you do? When you're out in a social event, at a bar, a restaurant, a barbecue, a corporate event, anywhere, how do you tend to answer the question, what do you do, when they approach you? I'm going to give you a couple seconds to do that. So far, it looks like most of you answer with your value proposition and ask what they do. Well, there we go. Some of you come back with different ways. You know, it's funny. I've known some people to basically, when they hear that question, they kind of ignore and walk away because they don't like to talk about what they do, and they'd rather talk about the weather or the Yankees or something else. And interestingly, it's completely a wasted opportunity if they walk away. Excuse me. So it's looking like there's a pretty even split between those of you who reply with your title and company and you ask what they do, or you answer with your value proposition and ask what they do. So it looks like you're all within the same thing. Now, oh, and look, and some of you actually asked them who you should connect with. So that's great. I like this breakdown though, because it seems like you've all kind of fallen into the same areas, which is a good thing. So let's talk about how to answer, what do you do? Now, in my opinion, when you hear what do you do, often your immediate reflex may be to respond with, well, I'm a litigation attorney at a medium-sized law firm, or I work as a portfolio manager in financial services. Or you might even say, I don't know, not much, I'm sort of between jobs. And that's probably about the worst thing you can say. And in response, you'll likely ask them, well, what do you do for a living, right? And you go back and forth for a few seconds, and then you move on to something else, a different conversation. Or you'll turn around and look at the baseball game, or you'll watch other people playing pool or something, or flipping the burgers, whatever. And that's a big mistake. The what do you do question is an extremely valuable and time-sensitive opportunity to really dramatically enhance your network and your job search. Instead of answering what do you do, really focus on the expertise that you bring to the table. It's much more interesting, and you'll have your listeners' attention immediately. You really will. And I'll give you a quick example. John says, "Hey, Mary, what do you do for a living?" And Mary says, "Well, look, for the past 15 years, I've been providing financial strategies and easy to grasp investment solutions to those people who are either too busy to manage their own funds or they don't necessarily have their finger on the pulse of the market like I do. I'm looking to speak with some savvy professionals who understand the importance of having a financial strategist like myself to partner with." Now, right there, some people might say, "Oh," and now that Mary would say, "Well, what do you, John, right?" But Mary continues and she says, "Well, do you have any advice on how I might best expand my network in that area? Or is there anyone else you think I should chat with?" And John will likely then say something like, "Well, that's interesting. Tell me more about those strategies." Or, "Actually, my good friend Bob Johnson, he's been looking for a capable financial manager for a while. He's right over here. Let me introduce you to him." But this is an absolutely critical step to securing a job lead. Don't ask them what they do right after your initial statement because they will get to that eventually anyway. They will eventually tell you what they do. But instead, make sure you have a call to action. Make sure you ask them to think of people they know who work in the field you want to be in. Make sure you ask for advice and you'll receive it. I promise you. Whenever someone asks someone else for advice, people love giving advice, don't they? I guarantee you, if I asked you for your advice on anything, you'd be delighted to tell me. Now, if you offer your resume or if you ask for a job, I promise you, those same people, they won't be interested in what you have to say. I can guarantee that also. In fact, they may take your resume, stick it in their pocket, and walk away. So remember, keep the focus on yourself and ask them to refer you or introduce you to someone in their network. I mean, that person will probably know someone else who knows someone else who can get you into a conversation with another someone at the company you want to work for, right? I mean, this is how people get hired. I've spoken about this before, but over 85% of people in this market are getting hired based on who they know, who their connections are, and being in the right place at the right time, but also being at the right place all the time. It's really essential that you are involved in this networking thing. And, I've talked about this before also, where, I'm not a big fan of networking. Most people aren't. But if you can do it this way, where whether you're meeting people and you're talking about what do you do, or you're doing it via LinkedIn, there are great ways to further your job search and get towards the career and the job you've always dreamt of by just doing a few simple things. So, what is the best way to really prepare for this? Well, I hate to say it because I always hated the word practice, but practice it. Practice what your value proposition is. Think about, well, what do you bring to the table? And put together 2 or 3 sentences that really talk about what your expertise is, right? But don't make it too specific and don't put too many big words. I mean, the one I used probably is a little too kind of corporate-y, and I might even make it a little bit less corporate-y, especially in a social environment, where I may even say something to the effect of, look, for the past 20 years, I've shown companies how to increase their bottom lines by developing new technologies that enable them to sell to a bigger audience. And I'm looking to bring that expertise and leverage it into a smaller startup firm. So, you're not using big words necessarily, but you're doing it in a conversational way, but in a way that they understand what you do. So once you've got these 2 to 3 sentences comfortable, and you start asking for them for their advice and the connections they know, that's a great way to answer that question. And you'll be amazed at how many opportunities and doors are opened just by, from now on, answering that question that way. Now, back to LinkedIn. When you get someone accepting your invitation and you get that email that says, "Congratulations, you're now connected to Bob." Well, what happens is Bob gets an email that says, "Congrats, you're now connected to Mark Moyer." But then his next screen shows him, "Here are other people you should know." And it takes Bob away from Mark. So he kind of forgets that he's already accepted the invitation from me. Meanwhile, I get that email that says, "Congrats, you're now connected to Bob." And then it'll say, would you like to look at his profile? Well, from now on, I want you, and I beg you and I implore you to click on that view profile. When you click on that view profile, it takes you to that his or her LinkedIn page, and you can look at them again. But best of all, now that you're connected, you have direct access to their email address. And when you have access to their email address, you can send them an email directly instead of going through LinkedIn. And I find that's much more effective. People have a tendency to clearly to read their own emails versus the ones that they receive through LinkedIn. So make sure you reply back via that email address. You capture that email address in their profile by going to their contact info button. You click on that and it'll say Bob Jones at whatever.com, yahoo.com. You send them an email directly. And again, this is something that you can create a template for and save it in that Word document that you have on your desktop, where in the subject line, you say, thanks for connecting. And then within the email, you start saying, thank you for accepting my invitation to connect on LinkedIn. And then in the body, you continue with basically a verbatim repetition of what you put in the invite, right? So in that invitation, if you had said, Bob, as a fellow Colgate graduate, I thought you'd be a great person to ask for some advice and insight as I'm considering a transition. Well, in your email, repeat the same thing by simply saying, as I mentioned in my invitation, I'm a fellow Colgate graduate, and I thought you'd be a great person to ask for some advice and insight as I'm considering a transition into the financial industry, the legal industry, whatever it might be. I'd love to set up a phone call with you, and perhaps we can take things from there. Well, then you're off and running because you send that email, Bob receives it, and this is right after he's connected with you, so he still remembers who you are, and then you're off and running. Now, at the bottom where I say remember, there's a very nuanced way, etc. The alternate sales close is amazingly effective. It's something that I learned way back in the days when I was in sales before recruiting. And basically it goes like this. When you're asking for the phone call, when you say, Bob, I'd love to set up a phone call with you, don't just say, let's set up a phone call in the near future or in the coming days, or let me know what works for you. Because quite frankly, Bob will read that and say, yeah, all right, whatever. Next week, next month, whenever. And you're not really giving such a compelling call to action, right? But the alternate sales close means you're giving the person two options. So you'll say, Bob, I happen to be available this coming Thursday or next Tuesday between 10 and 11 or 4 to 5. I'd love to set up one of those times for us to have that phone call. And all I ask for is just a couple brief minutes. But what you're doing is you're providing actual options to that person so that they will end up choosing one of them because one or the other is going to be better for them. Doesn't necessarily mean there are great times for this person, but they will put it in there. And then my advice is to follow that up immediately by saying, Bob, I really appreciate it. I look forward to that. I'm going to send you a calendar invite for us to put it in our calendar. Because when you don't do that, you run the risk of that person completely forgetting that they had set up that call with you and you not getting through. So it's absolutely essential that you suggest that you will send them a calendar invite to accept to lock that phone call into place. Now, Deb, you asked a question where you're saying, is it advisable to include your phone number with the initial invite? Well, absolutely. I mean, look, the bottom line is that we absolutely want people to want to call us, to have that conversation and to break away from the two-dimensional element of whether it's a screen or a resume, that sort of thing. Although actually, I'm sorry, you mentioned that you're talking about having it in the initial invitation to connect. No, I wouldn't put it in there. I would stick with the script that we'd sort of talked about. But in the email, absolutely. If you say, please feel free to call me at, and or let's set up a call in the coming days. What's best for you, Tuesday or Thursday, etc. Now, turning the phone call into an informal meeting. Now, this is something that most of us, including myself, tend to be a little uncomfortable with because we say, geez, you know, it's been hard enough for me to just get this person on the phone, much less try to set up a meeting with them. But look, if this person is a key influencer, is a hiring manager, is someone that's fairly important in the company you'd love to work at, you've got to push for these informal meetings because when you're in front of somebody face to face, they're going to be much more inclined to want to give you not just advice and insight, but also recommend people to you, referrals and so forth. Whereas they're going to be less inclined to do that on the phone and certainly less inclined to do that via email. So when you're on the phone with this person, make sure you ask them lots of questions. Make sure that you talk to them about the industry. Ask them how they got involved with it. Ask them what their feelings are about being at their company. Ask them what kind of advice would they give you if you were to consider working in the industry. At no point should you mention that you want to work at their company or you want to send them your resume. It's essential you don't do that. At no point in this phone conversation do you want them to say, uh-oh, Mark wants a job here. I don't know if I want to deal with this anymore. I better say I've got another call and get out of this phone call, right? You don't want them to bail out that way. You want them to keep on thinking that you are asking them directly for advice, which again, it's almost like a positive reaction to your endorphins. You get excited when people want your advice, right? I was on the phone earlier today with somebody who, I asked him, well, look, tell me something that you do for fun. And he said, well, honestly, I love to sing. I used to sing in a band. And I said, well, tell me a little bit more about that. And, if I wanted to be in a band, what are some of the things I should look for in a singer? And he was so excited to tell me. And after that point, he was completely fired up and engaged and was really into the conversation, even though we switched gears into actually an executive search that I'm working on and so forth. But when you get people fired up and excited, they're going to be much more interested in you. So as you're speaking to these people, make sure you mention to them, look, I'm going to be in your neck of the woods next Tuesday and Wednesday. And you know what? I'm going to be there in the afternoon. I'd love to be able to swing by, just pop my head in and really put a face to the name, get a chance to meet you a little bit more formally. Well, it's really challenging for someone to actually say, nah, that's not going to work, or no, I'm not interested, or nah, we'll do it some other time, because they've already gotten engaged. They're already giving you advice. They like you. But also as I mentioned here, make sure you ask them if they'd be able to share a few minutes with you, not spend. It's one of the things I learned way back in the million years ago when I was doing the sales thing. When you ask someone if they can spend a few minutes with you, the word spend is sort of a negative word. When you say share, people are more inclined to want to share. So try to make sure you add that into your vocabulary. Okay, this is the biggie. When we were talking earlier about asking for advice, please, from this point forward, never ever ask anyone for help. As I say, help is a four-letter word and it's a bad one to use. It really is. Almost nobody likes to help. Whenever I used to hear the word help when I was younger, I used to associate it with my friends who would say, "Hey, Mark, you going to be in town over the weekend?" Yeah, why? Well, listen, I really need your help. Well, the second I hear that, I'm like, oh, actually, I'm kidding. I got to go see my grandmother, right? And nobody likes to help, but people love to give advice. And it's really the same thing. If you ask whoever you're on the phone with, geez, I'd really like your help. I'm looking for a new job. Click, delete, whatever. But if you say, look, I'd love to get your advice. I'm considering a transition, and it seems like you're uniquely positioned to really give me some great insight. And as I say, everyone loves giving advice. I mean, you know this, your family, your spouse, everyone's got their 2 cents worth, right? But you really develop that strong relationship, a strong rapport by asking for the advice instead of giving your own advice. There's plenty of time that you can do that down the road. And I underline this for a good reason. Please let them do most of the talking. It's really hard, and I tried this, I really have, to space out or do other things or whatever it might be when you're the one speaking. I can tell you right now that as I'm speaking to you, it is basically impossible for me to also think about what's going to happen with the Yankees this year or what's for dinner, etc. So when you get them to speak, they're going to be much more engaged. So make sure you have a lot of questions that you ask them and ask them their opinion and keep them engaged. It's absolutely essential that you do that. This way, they're going to end up really liking you. So what will happen now is that they're going to be thinking, well, geez, all this advice they're giving, they're really getting to like you. And in the midst of that, you intersperse every once in a while a little bit about what you bring to the table. And you can, as they're talking, you can say, oh, you know what? When I was back at DuPont, I did that sort of thing where I ran a project where I was overseeing 26 other people. And it really turned out to be a great project because it saved the company $2.8 million. But tell me more about what you've done at this company. But see, when you interject a couple of things here and there, not to dominate the conversation, but just to include it in there, they're going to be starting to develop interest in you. And they're going to be starting to think, wow, this is the kind of person I really like. And when you start asking them, well, look, Bob, I was wondering, what kind of companies do you think I should be going after based on what you've heard about my skill set? And you'll be amazed at how often the Bobs of the world will say, well, look, actually, have you ever considered looking at us? Have you ever considered applying to jobs here? Would you consider working here? And as I say there, when it's their idea, your chances of landing a job there absolutely jumps through the roof, because then they're the ones presenting your candidacy to senior management, to human resources, to the hiring managers, etc. And suddenly your resume ends up at the top of the pile. All right, before I go too much further, I just wanted to see if you had any other questions. Take a little 30-second break here. Actually, I'm not really good at 30-second breaks. It seems like an eternity, doesn't it? But we covered a lot of ground here today. And, in the last maybe 40 minutes or so, I think what you've been hopefully hearing are some really pretty strong tips and strategies and actionable things that you can do right after this webinar, that you can get rolling. You can go onto LinkedIn and start connecting with as many as you want, 50, 100, 200 other people that you share a common bond with, and you send them personalized invitations to connect. They accept your invitation. And look, if you send out 100, you might get at least, with those personalized invitations, you're going to at least 20 of them that reply and accept within the first day or so. Another 20 maybe a day or two later. Another 20 maybe a week or so later. Another 20 maybe 6 months later or something. 20 of them at least maybe delete it, don't bother, they don't accept invites, whatever it might be. But what happens is that that as you send all these invitations out, they will start accepting these things. You will reply back with those emails. When you reply back with those emails, you're going to get them fired up to want to talk to you. You start talking about advice. You start bringing in what your value proposition is and what you bring to the table. And from there, they get excited and interested in meeting with you because you after the phone call, you've said, look, I'm going to be in your area. Would love to stop by and say hi. They'll hopefully at the same time also introduce you to other people. And that's something that while you're meeting the person, you want to make sure that you say to them, listen, is there anybody else here you think I should say hello to while I'm here? And they may say, oh yeah, look, Mary's over there. Let me say, Mary, come over here and say hi to Mark. It is amazing how well that happens when it's outside of the formal interview process. And on top of that, when you see the success rate of that, well, then it turns into interviews where afterwards, Mary may talk to Bob and say, look, you know what, we should bring in that guy Mark for this so-and-so opening that we've got. And then you're off and running. But best of all this started because you've reached out to these people and you've gotten the ball started. And it's turned into the situation where you've turned these LinkedIn connections into the informal meetings that develop into interviews and eventually offers. So I hope this has all been educational for you and you've learned a lot here. Now stick around with the next few more slides. And at the end, I'm going to let one of you win an hour's coaching call with me that's worth $400 and up. And I've also got another special surprise at the very end that I'm going to talk to you about. Now, just one more reminder about the upcoming webinar. It's in 2 weeks, and I've got to limit it to just 50 participants because I want to keep it, fairly sort of a fairly small sample size of people. But I'm going to be talking about 3 simple steps to ace your interview. And once again, we're going to be talking about the 3 critical steps that I've been using to prepare my candidates for their interviews over these past 25 years. And these 3 steps will definitely transform how you perform in the interview process. And look, again, I want you to be the chosen candidate that receives the offer. And these 3 simple steps, they are super effective. And over all these years, as I've presented them to people, what I've noticed is that almost everybody has said, geez, I've never even thought about preparing for an interview this way. All right, so I'm going to knock out a couple of questions here real quick. One person asked, well, look, Mark, as a percentage, what would you say is the breakdown between jobs that were obtained by applying to online listings and or recruiters and getting a job by personal networking? Great question. And I just saw a stat that was put out the other day. A study showed that, believe it or not, and I'm saddened to say this as an executive recruiter, but only 3 or 4% of all positions are being filled by executive recruiters. That's it. Another amazing stat, only about 10 to 12% of all positions that are being filled are filled by the online, the corporate websites, the job boards, etc. It's amazing. I would have thought it was higher, but it's not. But you may have seen, and firsthand, that when you apply online, you don't get any answers. You don't hear anything. It almost seems like a giant black hole. So 80+% of all the positions being filled are filled by networking and who you know and how you get to know them and so forth. So please, by all means, dedicate the vast majority of your time to expanding your network and creating these connections. Another question was, how would I suggest, reaching back to a prior career, skill sets that happened in a sort of going back several years? Again, when you're talking to somebody who might be in a position to hire you, it's again important to focus on your essential skills, the things that you bring to the table, but more importantly, what you're going to bring them that they can use going forward. So obviously, if you invented the first Betamax machine, no one's going to care. Or if you were, involved with Windows 1.0 or something, nobody cares. But if you've shown the capability of developing new types of technology or new creative designs or new marketing materials, they're not going to necessarily care that some of the stuff that you did was a long time ago. If you suggest that you have that capability and that skill set and that expertise. So it's always important that you don't necessarily say, well, I'm currently a financial analyst, but I really want to be a lawyer. Instead, you say, look, I have several years of legal experience and I'm looking to leverage that into a position at a law firm. Who do you know that I should speak with? That's it. So if you have any other questions, keep throwing them in the box there. But what I want to talk about quickly now is that this webinar coming up in 2 weeks, look, what I typically do is I spend a lot of time with one-on-one personal coaching sessions. And to be quite honest, they can be pretty pricey and may not be for all of you. I'd love to be able to coach all of you one-on-one, but again, it's a fairly expensive proposition. But what I'm doing now going forward is providing the same content that I offer during these one-on-one sessions in this webinar format. And it's going to be just for a very low investment of just $97 per webinar. That's it, 97 bucks, basically $3 a day. That's what, a half a beer. I don't know how you want to compare it to, but just for $97, you'll be getting the same content that most people will be spending $400, $500, $600 for on a one-on-one basis. But more importantly, what I'm going to offer to you that have been part of this webinar today is a $30 discount off the next webinar. So your investment is only $67. And the surprise I was waiting to tell you here at the very end is that I'm going to give 2 of you the ability to register for the next webinar for free. So at the very last slide, I'm going to put in the chat box on the right a link to register for the next webinar, and there'll be a timestamp where you'll have basically 20 minutes to register from the time that I present the opportunity. And again, this is only available to you and only for 20 minutes after the webinar is ended. Now, some of you may say, well, Mark, geez, I can get a lot of great advice for free. Well, I happen to disagree. I think you can get a lot of advice for free, but I don't know how great it is. I'm sure you've heard and gotten some advice from friends, from families, from coworkers, all over the place. But look, these people aren't necessarily either executive recruiters that know what it takes to get hired in this market, or career coaches that have been successfully helping people land the jobs of their dreams. And look, you're just using, whether it's job search strategies that are really shown by outplacement recruiters and some other career coaches and authors that are using really outdated stuff. I mean, how many of them have said, look, apply to jobs online, one is bound to land? Well, that's not true. I mean, it's an immense waste of your time. If only 10% of jobs are being filled online, and at least 200 people are applying to those jobs, well, you have a 1 in 2,000 chance. Come on, that's ridiculous. You have a much better chance of using these strategies you've learned today and in the future in my other webinars that really jump yourself so far ahead of your competition. It really is amazing how much advice that is out there is lousy advice. It really is. And some of you may know that already, maybe not. So look, the people that have gone through my coaching program, they have absolutely found out what their dream job really is. They've developed a list of people to network with. We talked about that target list earlier. And they've become expert networkers. And it doesn't mean that you need to be a type A personality to be an expert networker. Some people think I am, but honestly, when I go into a room full of strangers, trust me, I'm not interested in walking around talking to them and seeing what they're all about and so forth. No, I'd rather just have my beer. But when you do things through LinkedIn, when you're the one that is reaching out directly to people, asking them to connect, getting their acceptance, following up with an email, then following up with a phone call, and then the in-person casual or informal meeting, it will lead to interviews and your offers. And these people that have gone through my program have absolutely landed offers in the positions that they've always wanted to be in. So this is why it's essential for you to get some really strong advice. But listen, I appreciate all of you for having attended this webinar. It's been my pleasure to hopefully show you a bunch of strategies that will help you. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime. You can shoot me a phone call or send me an email. And I hope you all want to attend the next webinar. There'll be, again, tons of information about how to really kick butt in your next interview process. Thanks again, and look forward to helping you chart your course to success and land the job of your dreams. Thanks so much.